"Leave the fat one. The horses won't make it with that kind of dead weight." Those were the last words Beatrice Hartwell heard before the wagon wheels rattled away into the white distance. Colorado Territory, November 1877. The storm had come down from the high peaks like a living thing, swallowing the mountain pass in sheets of snow and knife-edged wind. The wagon master had paced, cursed the darkening sky, then turned his gaze on Bee the way so many men had before him, as if she were a problem to be solved, not a person to be saved. "We have to lighten the load," he'd snapped. "Supplies or her. You choose." Her cousin had looked at the stacked crates of flour, tools, and rifles meant for the mining camp, then at Bee's broad shoulders, heavy hips, and face already raw from the cold. His jaw clenched. "They'll send a sled back for you as soon as we're through the pass," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You'll be safe at the way station." They left her in front of the abandoned building with a half-sack of flour, 3 matches, and a blanket too thin for mountain winter. By the time Bee realized no one was coming back, the storm had thickened to a roaring white curtain. The station walls groaned, the roof leaked snowmelt, and every gust of wind felt like a hand pushing her closer to the edge of death. So she started walking. Each step was a battle. Snow clung to her skirts, dragging at her legs. The cold chewed through leather shoes never meant for mountain travel. Her lungs burned, her cheeks stung, and more than once she thought about lying down and letting the storm take her. But stubbornness had always been stronger than despair in Beatrice Hartwell's heart. Somewhere between one labored breath and the next, she saw it, a dark shape through the blur of white, a squat, sturdy outline against the screaming wind. A cabin. She stumbled toward it, half falling, half crawling, fingers numb as she fumbled with the latch. The door gave way and she nearly pitched forward into a single-room shelter. Rough-hewn walls, a small iron stove, a narrow bed, a stack of split firewood. The sight blurred through tears of pure relief. She forced shaking hands to build a fire, each match a tiny act of defiance against the storm. When the first fragile flames caught and spread, she huddled close, her large body trembling, clothes soaked, boots stiff with ice. She was just beginning to believe she might survive the night when the door slammed open behind her, hard enough to rattle the hinges. A man filled the doorway, broad as the frame itself, snow crusted in his beard and coat. His scarred face was turned toward her, eyes sharp, rifle in hand. "What the hell are you doing in my cabin?" he demanded. "Before we go on, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now, and be honest with yourself. If you'd been in that wagon train, would you have fought for Beatrice to stay, or would you have let them leave her behind?" For a heartbeat, Bee couldn't speak. The stranger in the doorway seemed carved from the very mountain itself, broad-shouldered beneath a snow-heavy coat, boots caked with ice, a thick beard framing a jaw hardened by years of solitude, and the scar that cut from his left eye to his jawline made him look equal parts dangerous and wounded. I'm sorry," she stammered, rising too fast. Pain shot through her legs, and she wobbled before steadying herself on the stove. "The storm, please. I didn't know this was your cabin. I just needed shelter. I can leave if you want." "No, you can't," he snapped, his voice rough but not cruel. "You walk back out there, you'll freeze to death before you get 20 steps. He kicked the door shut behind him and leaned his rifle against the wall. Snow slid from his coat in soft thumps. "Explain." Bee swallowed, meeting his gaze only briefly before dropping her eyes. She was used to men staring at her, usually with disgust, sometimes with amusement. This man looked at her differently, not kindly, not harshly, just assessing, as if she were a puzzle he didn't trust yet. "My name is Beatrice Hartwell," she began, pulling her wool shawl tighter around her large frame. "I was traveling with a wagon train headed to the Silver Pine mining camp. My cousin arranged work for me there." "And they left you?" he interrupted, brow furrowing. "In this weather?" Bee exhaled shakily. "They said the horses couldn't handle the weight. Supplies were more important. They told me a rescue sled would come." A bitter smile tugged at her lips. "It didn't." Magnus's jaw tightened. He hung his coat on a peg near the door, revealing a rugged linen shirt stretched across a chest built by labor, not vanity. "That way station they dumped you at? It's been abandoned since spring. Anyone who knows this mountain would have known that." "So they lied," Bee whispered, "just to get rid of me." Magnus didn't soften, but something in his posture shifted, understanding maybe, or anger on her behalf. "My name's Magnus Stone. I keep trap lines through this range. This cabin's mine." He gestured around them. "And you're damn lucky you made it here. Storm's only getting worse." Bee's legs trembled, the exhaustion catching her now that fear was fading. She sank down onto the single wooden chair, her heavy body sinking it deep into the rug beneath. "I'm sorry for using your firewood," she said. "I shouldn't have touched your things." "You were freezing," Magnus replied. "A fire's the only smart thing you did today." His voice wasn't unkind, just blunt. "But we need to be clear. This storm could last a week, maybe 2. Even after that, the snow will be waist-deep in places. Until the mountain decides otherwise, we're stuck here together." Bee's heart lurched. 2 weeks? Trapped? With you? Magnus shot her a sharp look. "I'm not thrilled about cabin company either, sweetheart. I've lived alone for 12 years. Last thing I expected was a stranger, any stranger, sitting by my stove using up my woodpile." He leaned forward slightly. "But I sure as hell won't throw you out. I'm not that kind of man." Bee nodded, eyes lowering again. "Thank you. Truly." Magnus moved toward the stove, fetched a dented kettle, and set water to heat. "Coffee," he muttered. "Best way to thaw the inside after you've nearly frozen the outside." He poured her a steaming tin cup. She accepted it with both hands, grateful for the warmth spreading into her palms. He watched her over the rim of his own cup, studying the details she couldn't hide. The wind-burned cheeks, the wet hem of her skirt, the boots cracked from too many miles, the way she tried to make herself smaller, even though she filled the chair completely. "How far did you walk from the station?" Magnus asked. "Maybe 3 miles, Bee said. "I don't know. The storm swallowed everything. I just walked until my legs felt like stone." He nodded toward her soaked skirt. "You'll need dry clothes. I've got nothing that fits, but blankets will do. You can change behind the curtain." He gestured to a hanging wool blanket that divided the cabin's sleeping area from the rest. "You'll take the bed. I'll take the floor." Her eyes widened. "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will," Magnus said, voice final. "A person your size loses heat faster than you think. Bed stays warmer. That's survival, not manners." Bee startled at the bluntness, then nodded, oddly reassured. She wasn't used to men speaking to her without mockery or hesitation. She wasn't used to men speaking to her like someone whose survival genuinely mattered. Magnus set down his cup. 2 weeks, maybe more. We need ground rules. She held her breath, waiting for the inevitable, but his gaze was steady, firm. First rule, we pull equal weight. You manage the cabin, I handle the outside work. B nodded. Second rule, no locked doors. We're depending on each other. Secrets get people killed. Another nod. Third rule. Magnus's expression hardened. We don't talk about your size or my face. Neither is relevant to staying alive. B blinked, stunned. You don't care? Magnus shrugged. You're here, you're breathing. That's what matters. End of discussion. For the first time in weeks, something warm, not fire, not coffee, but recognition, unfolded inside her chest. This man didn't pity her. He didn't loathe her. He simply accepted her presence as fact. And in a lifetime full of being pushed away, that felt extraordinary. The storm raged for 3 days without pause, the kind of relentless mountain blizzard that swallowed sound, sky, and hope in equal measure. Inside the cabin, the wind howled like wolves circling a camp, and snow piled against the door so heavily that Magnus had to shoulder it open each morning just to keep it from sealing shut entirely. But I watched him do it on the second morning, broad back straining, boots planted, his breath clouding as he shoved against the mound of white outside. You shouldn't go out there, she said softly. It looks dangerous. Everything up here is dangerous, Magnus replied without turning. But we won't survive long if I don't check the trap lines nearby. There might be a rabbit or two left above the snow. If not, we're eating nothing but dried venison and hope. He grunted, pushed the door wide enough to slip out, then slammed it behind him. The cabin felt instantly colder. Bea stood still for a long moment, staring at the wooden planks that separated her from a world she'd nearly died in. Then she turned toward the stove. Work, any work, kept panic at bay. Magnus had shown her how to chop tinder from the bark stored in the corner, how to arrange logs so they burned slow and hot, how to keep a kettle of snow melting at all times so water never ran short. By the time Magnus returned, coated in frost and carrying one thin hair and a face stung red from windburn, the cabin was warm again. "You're good at that," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Keeping the fire steady takes practice." "Just following your instructions," Bea said. I don't want to make things harder for you." Magnus shot her a look, sharp, not unkind. "You being alive makes things easier for me. Dead weight is a burden. Living people help out." Her cheeks warmed. The bluntness, strangely, hurt less than honeyed lies would have. They fell into a rhythm that first week, awkward at first, then natural. Magnus hunted, collected snow, did repairs, and guarded the cabin from the elements with the fierce protectiveness of a man who'd lived too long alone. Bea kept the fire going, cooked meals with quiet skill, mended torn gloves, and cleaned the cramped interior until it began to feel less like a trap and more like a refuge. In the evenings, Magnus taught her simple survival tasks: how to tie snares, how to identify storm patterns by the sound of the wind in the rafters, how to check for frostbite along her fingers and toes. "You listen well," he remarked one night as she repeated a knot he'd shown her. "Most people talk too much to learn anything." "I've been told I talk too much," Bea laughed softly. "Not here, you don't." She looked up. "Does it bother you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, it's actually kind of nice hearing another voice." Silence stretched between them after that, not uncomfortable, just full of shared understanding, neither knew how to name. But not every moment was gentle. On the fourth night, Bee woke gasping. The fire had burned low. Her body felt cold down to the bone, the kind of creeping cold that reminded her of the abandoned way station and the fear that had wrapped around her like ice. She pulled the blankets tighter, but her teeth still chattered. The storm clawed at the walls. Panic rose, the same fear of being left, forgotten, discarded. "Magnus?" Her voice trembled before she could stop it. "Are you awake?" A rustle on the floor, then his voice, rough from sleep. "You all right?" I'm cold," she admitted, ashamed. "I think the fire—" He was on his feet immediately, adding 2 logs, building the flames back to life. Warmth began to crawl across the cabin once more. Bee exhaled shakily. Magnus crouched beside the bed. "You're shaking." "It's nothing. I'm just—" Bee swallowed. "I get scared sometimes. Being alone. Being left behind." She hated how small her voice sounded. Magnus studied her, his hazel eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You're not alone, and no one's leaving you. Not while this storm keeps the world buried." She blinked back unexpected tears. "You don't mind if I wake you? I know it's silly." "It's not silly." He stood and pulled another blanket over her. "Cold kills fast. Fear kills faster. You wake me any time you need." She nodded, comforted in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. As the days passed, conversations deepened. One afternoon, while Magnus whittled a fishing spear and Bee stirred a pot of soup, she asked, "Why did you come up here? Truly?" Magnus paused, blade hovering above the wood. "People talk," he said at last, "even when they don't know a damn thing. In town, everyone saw the scar and decided what I was. A threat, a monster, a warning to keep their pretty daughters close." He set the spear aside, expression grim. "Up here, no one stares. No one crosses the street. The mountains don't judge." Bee listened quietly, her heart twisting with familiarity. "I know what that feels like," she said. "People don't see me either, not who I really am, just my size." Magnus lifted his eyes to hers. "People are fools." "Maybe," she said softly, but their words still hurt. "I know." He returned to whittling, slower now. "That's why the mountains are better." Bea smiled. "And now you're stuck with me in them." Magnus glanced at her, one quick, unreadable look, before returning to his work. "There are worse things than being stuck with someone who knows how to make edible soup." She laughed, surprised by the warmth spreading in her chest. They were still 2 strangers, trapped by the storm. But something was changing, something small, something steady, something neither of them trusted yet, but both of them felt. A spark buried beneath the snow. The storm eased on the 10th morning, not enough to travel, but enough to let pale light seep through the frost-laced window. For the first time, the cabin wasn't fighting to keep the world out. It simply existed, suspended in a hush of white stillness. And inside those rough-hewn walls, something else had settled too, a quiet, unspoken companionship. Bee woke to the smell of wood smoke and something warm simmering on the stove. Magnus stood beside it, stirring a pot with practiced efficiency. His coat was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong arms nicked with small old scars, proof of the life he'd built in these mountains. "You're awake," he said without turning. "Sit up slow. Your legs are still recovering from that walk." Bee pushed herself upright, wincing slightly. "What are you cooking?" "Porridge," Magnus replied. "Don't get excited. Just oats, water, and the last of the dried berries. But it'll keep you warm. He turned then, carrying the bowl to her with both hands, as if she were something fragile he wasn't used to handling. "Here, eat first." She accepted the bowl, surprised at how comforting the heat felt against her palms. "You don't have to serve me every meal, Magnus." He arched a brow. "You cooked the last 3 dinners. Balance." "But still, Bee," he said, his rough voice softening a shade, "you're not a burden." The words hit her harder than he likely intended. She lowered her gaze to the porridge. "Most people don't agree." Magnus sat on the edge of the table, folding his arms. "Most people are idiots." Bee laughed, small, startled, genuine. It warmed the space between them more than the stove. The cabin had begun to feel different, not just a shelter, a place with life in it. She cleaned, mended, organized the small space until it bore her quiet touch. A warm blanket draped over the rocker, herbs drying above the rafters, their boots set side by side near the door. It felt lived in a way Magnus hadn't experienced in years. After breakfast, Magnus handed her a small wooden box. "Here, something to keep you busy while I'm out checking traps." Bee opened it to find a sewing kit, needles, thread, scraps of cloth. "Where did you get this?" "Old trader," Magnus said. "Thought you might like to mend those gloves of yours." She ran her fingers along the rough wooden edges. "Thank you." He shrugged, suddenly awkward. "Just figured you'd want something to do. Long days in here." But she could see the truth beneath his gruffness. He'd thought about her needs, and that mattered more than the gift itself. When he left to check the lines, Bee watched him through the window, his silhouette strong against the snow, moving with purposeful ease. A man comfortable in his solitude, yet slowly, cautiously, allowing someone else into it. When he returned an hour later with 2 rabbits and a pack dusted in snow, he stopped short at the door. The table was set, not elegantly, not with fine linens or polished silver, but with care. 2 bowls evenly spaced, a pot of stew simmering, the floor swept clean, the bed neatly made. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. "I know," Bee replied, "but it felt right." He stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. For a man who lived half wild, half feral in the mountains, the cabin had never been anything but shelter. Now it felt like a home. Later that evening, Magnus brought her a pair of thick wool socks he'd found in a trunk. "They were my sister's," he said simply, placing them in her hands. "Haven't had use for them in years. They'll fit you better." Bee held the socks against her chest. "Magnus, you're being very kind." He looked away, jaw tightening. "I'm not good at kindness." "You're better than you think." Their eyes met, soft, lingering, uncertain. Magnus blinked first, breaking the moment. "Come here," he said gruffly. "Time you learned how to split kindling." Bee blinked. "What?" "Magnus, I'm not exactly built for chopping wood." "That's why I'm showing you," he replied. "You'll do fine." Outside the cabin, he handed her the small axe. Her breath fogged the cold air. Magnus positioned her hands, guiding her stance. "Feet apart," he said. "Steady. Grip firm, not tight." His hands brushed hers, not intentionally tender, but warm, grounding. Bee felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. She swung and missed the log entirely. Magnus chuckled, a sound deep enough to vibrate in her chest. "Try again." She did, and again. On the 4th attempt, the log split clean in 2. Bee gasped. "I did it!" Magnus grinned, a real unguarded smile that transformed his scarred face into something achingly human. "Told you." She stared at him, unable to stop her returning smile. Snow fell around them, silent and glittering, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. They returned inside to the warmth of the cabin. Magnus made space for her near the fire, handing her a cup of hot broth. "You earning your keep," he said jokingly. "Next thing you know, you'll be fixing the roof." Bee shook her head, laughter in her eyes. "Don't push your luck, Mr. Stone." He watched her for a long moment after that, long enough for her smile to fade into something softer, more vulnerable. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just, it's been a long time since there was someone in here who wasn't me." Bee lowered her gaze. "Do you mind?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "No," Magnus said. "I don't mind at all." That night, as she slept in the bed he insisted she take, Magnus lay on the floor beneath a pile of blankets, staring up at the beams above. The storm had quieted. The world outside was cold and still. Inside, he could hear bees even breathing, a steady, comforting sound, a reminder he wasn't alone, a reminder he didn't want to be. The days grew longer, the storm quieter, but the air inside the cabin carried a new tension, not the dangerous kind, but the kind that formed when two wounded souls drew close enough to graze each other's truths. Winter softened its grip little by little, yet Magnus and Bee both sensed an approaching shift. Survival had brought them together. Something deeper was beginning to hold them there. On the 13th morning, Magnus returned from checking a distant snare line with a look Bea hadn't seen before. Tight, serious, shadowed. "What happened?" she asked, rising from the stove. He brushed snow from his shoulders. "Found tracks. Animal?" "No." He removed his gloves slowly, deliberately. "Boot prints." Bea felt her stomach drop. Someone came near the cabin. "Not too close," Magnus said. "Looked like two men on foot. They stayed at the ridge, watched for a bit, then headed north." "Bandits?" Bea whispered. Could be prospectors. Could be worse." Magnus's gaze sharpened. "Either way, we need to be careful." Bea wrapped her arms around herself. "Do you think they saw us? Saw me?" He stepped toward her. "It doesn't matter if they did. They're not getting near you." The intensity in his voice steadied her, but it also stirred something deeper. Fear not of danger, but of how much she wanted to believe him. "Magnus, there's something I should tell you," she said, voice trembling slightly. He paused. "Go on." She sank onto the edge of the bed, twisting her hands together. "Those men who abandoned me, they weren't just cruel, they were afraid." She took a slow breath. "People talk about me in Denver, about my size, my stubbornness, my inability to be what a woman should be. I overheard someone say letting me join the wagon train was a charity act, not a partnership." Magnus's jaw tightened. "That's not fear, that's ignorance." "It wasn't only that," she continued softly. "A few years ago, I was engaged. Briefly." Magnus froze. His name was Peter. A kind man, or so I thought. But after a few months, he said I was too big. That standing next to me embarrassed him. That he didn't want to hear whispers about the size of his wife. He broke it off in front of half the neighborhood, said he needed someone more suitable. Magnus sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're telling me this because you think I'll leave?" he asked quietly. "I'm telling you because men don't stay, Magnus. They tolerate. They endure until they can't, and then they go." Her voice cracked. "I don't want you to feel trapped here with me. When the storm melts, when you're free to travel, you don't have to pretend anything." Magnus turned to her fully, his expression raw. "Bee, look at me." She did. "No one kept me here," he said. "Winter didn't chain me to you. I stayed because I wanted to. Because you make this cabin feel like more than a pile of logs in the snow. You make it feel lived in, warm, human." Her throat tightened. "I'm afraid to believe that." "Believe it anyway." She dropped her gaze, overwhelmed. After a moment, Magnus spoke again. "If we're sharing secrets, I've got one of my own." Bea looked up. "I wasn't always alone," he said. "There was someone, years ago, before the scar." Her breath caught. "Her name was Liliana. Beautiful, gentle, soft-spoken. We were planning to marry." He swallowed. "Then the bear came down from the ridge. I fought it off, but it marked me. This." He traced the jagged line along his cheek. "After that, Liliana couldn't look at me the same. Her father said she shouldn't marry a man with a monster's face." She didn't argue. Bee stared at him, horrified. "Magnus." "I lost more than work that year," he said simply. "I lost the version of myself I thought people could love. That's why I came here. No one to judge, no one to leave." Bea reached out, hesitantly, trembling, and rested her hand on his. He flinched, not in rejection, but in surprise. "You're not a monster," she whispered, "not even close." His hand turned beneath hers, fingers brushing her palm in a slow, searching way. Before either could say more, a muffled crack echoed from outside, something snapping under weight. Magnus stood instantly, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside." "Magnus, Bee, please." He cracked the door open just enough to scan the snow. The ridge was quiet, blanketed in white. No movement, no figures. But the unease from earlier lingered like smoke. When he stepped back in, he bolted the door. "They're not close," he said, "but someone's out there, and I don't like leaving you alone." Bee nodded, heart pounding. That night, the wind returned, soft but persistent, brushing against the cabin like unseen fingers. Magnus kept the lantern burning long after they usually slept, sitting in the rocking chair with his rifle beside him. Bee watched him from the bed, lit by the warm glow of the fire. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For staying awake, for watching over me." Magnus met her eyes. Something unguarded passed between them, fragile, powerful, deeply human. "You're worth watching over," he said. Bee felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, from being seen. Outside, the mountain waited. Inside, something stronger than the storm was beginning to take shape. The warning came not from a sound, but from a feeling, a shift in the air, a heaviness that pressed against the cabin walls as though the mountain itself were holding its breath. Magnus woke before dawn, not from a dream, but from instinct. Something was wrong. He slipped from his blankets, crossed the cabin in 2 strides, and eased the lantern wick higher. Bee stirred beneath the quilts. "Magnus?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Is it morning?" "Not yet." He held up a hand. "Stay quiet." Bee pushed herself up on one elbow, watching him scan the room, then the frosted window. She heard it too then, faint, crunching, slow, deliberate, someone moving through deep snow. Her heartbeat fluttered painfully. "Is it the men from the ridge?" Magnus didn't answer, which told her enough. He grabbed his rifle from beside the rocking chair and crossed to the door, checking the latch, then the small slit in the wood he used as a peephole. 2 figures. Too close. Too still. "Bandits?" Bee whispered. "Maybe. Maybe not." His voice had gone low, flat, focused, the tone of a man who had survived more winters than enemies. She clutched the blanket to her chest. Do they know we're here? They know someone's here. Magnus stepped back from the door. No fire trails, no smoke. They had to see footprints earlier, probably waited for dark. Should we hide? Bea asked. Magnus shook his head. Cabins too small, doors too flimsy. If they want in, we meet them standing. The idea of standing terrified her. She was not quick, she was not nimble, she was not a fighter. But the idea of Magnus standing alone terrified her more. Before she could gather her courage, a fist slammed against the door. The sound cracked through the cabin like a rifle shot. "Open up!" a voice barked. "We need shelter. Storm's coming again." Another voice, rougher. "We know you're in there. We saw the tracks. Open the damn door." Magnus didn't move. "You've got the whole mountain for shelter. Move along." "Don't play with us." The first voice grew sharp, hostile. "We saw 2 sets of tracks. We know you're not alone. Bring her out." Bea felt her blood go cold. Magnus exhaled, long and slow. "Last warning. You take one more step toward this door, and I end the conversation permanently." A tense silence followed, then a low, mocking laugh. "You think that fat woman you got in there is worth dying over?" Bea flinched as if struck. Magnus lifted his rifle. "She's worth more than the 2 of you combined," he said. Another laugh, colder. "We're coming in." The first blow hit the door hard enough to shake snow loose from the roof. Bea gasped and braced herself against the bed frame. Magnus turned to her. "Get behind the stove." "No." Bea's voice wobbled, but she didn't look away. "I won't hide. You told me secrets. You bared your pain. You trusted me. Let me stand with you now." Magnus stared, stunned. She rose, slowly, painfully, but with a steady resolve he hadn't expected. Her body wasn't built for battle, but it was built for endurance, and courage didn't depend on muscle. Another crash splintered the hinges. Magnus pressed her hand into his for a brief moment. "Stay behind me. If they get through, I shoot first. You run." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. The door shattered. 2 men stumbled inside, unshaven, desperate-looking, rifles raised. They froze when they met Magnus's gun already aimed at them. "Drop them," Magnus growled. "Or what?" one sneered. "You'll shoot with your lady watching?" Magnus's voice was ice. "She's the reason you're still breathing. Drop the rifles." That was when Bea stepped forward, not in front of Magnus, but beside him, not hiding, not shrinking, standing. The intruders hesitated. For all their mockery, neither expected the fat woman to lift her chin, square her shoulders, and anchor herself like a mountain beside the scarred man defending her. "You won't touch him," Bea said, voice steady. The men wavered. Magnus felt something fierce and alive ignite in his chest. "You heard her," he said. "Weapons on the floor, now." The first rifle clattered to the planks. The second followed moments later. Magnus kicked them out of reach. "Now turn around and walk." "You'll freeze us," one shouted. "You chose the wrong cabin," Magnus replied. "Count yourself lucky you chose the wrong victims." They scrambled out into the snow and disappeared into the pale pre-dawn light. Magnus closed the door, what remained of it, and leaned against it, breathing hard. The cabin was cold from the broken frame, but Bea walked to him, hands trembling, eyes wide with shock and something like revelation. "You stood beside me," Magnus said softly. "I wasn't going to let you fight alone." Magnus reached up and cupped her cheek, the touch instinctive, reverent, awed. "My God, Bea," he murmured. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met." Her breath caught, and in that moment the danger outside no longer felt bigger than what was growing inside the cabin. The sky was pale silver by the time Magnus wedged the broken door shut with spare lumber. The wind whispered outside, shaking loose snow from the eaves, but the danger had passed. Inside, the cabin was colder than it had been in days. Still, Bee barely felt it. Her entire body hummed with the fragile, shaking strength of someone who had just done something she never believed herself capable of. Magnus set the hammer aside and straightened slowly, rubbing his scarred jaw. "We'll need to fix this properly when the weather clears," he muttered. Bee managed a trembling smile. "You saved us." Magnus turned to her, surprised. "Bee, I fired no shots. They left because you stood there. You stared down two desperate men like you were born to it." "I was terrified," she whispered. "Courage isn't fearlessness," Magnus said. "It's standing up anyway." He stepped closer, one slow, steady stride at a time, until he was right in front of her. The fire crackled behind them, casting their shadows high on the log walls. Bee's breath caught when he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "When I first saw you in my cabin," Magnus murmured, "all I saw was a stranger who'd make my winter harder." Bee's heartbeat stumbled. "And now," she whispered, "now I see the woman who kept me alive more than any fire could." Her eyes stung. She lowered them, overwhelmed, but Magnus gently lifted her chin with one calloused finger. "I meant what I said," he said softly. "You're not a burden. You're not dead weight. You're strength in a form the world's too blind to recognize." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't hide them. Magnus's hand cupped her face fully now, warm and steady. "Bee Hartwell, you stood beside me when everyone else in your life walked away from you. You didn't shrink from danger. You didn't shrink from me." His voice roughened. "And I don't want this cabin to feel empty again." She took a step closer, their breath mingling in the cold air. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Bee said, barely above a whisper. "Not if you don't want to be." His expression softened, cracks appearing in the stoic mask he wore like armor. "I don't want to be alone," he admitted, "not if the alternative is you." The silence that followed was full, not empty, a silence that held promise. Bee rested her forehead lightly against his chest. Magnus's arms came around her, careful, respectful, but sure, and she melted into the warmth she had longed for without daring to hope for. "Magnus," she whispered, voice trembling with both hope and fear, "the storm will break soon. Travel will open. I'll have to make a choice." "You don't owe me anything," he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I know. That's why the choice finally feels real." The wind outside eased, settling into quiet. Inside the cabin, they stood together beside the flickering fire, two lives that had collided in a moment of desperation, but were now held together by something gentler, something resilient. Magnus brushed his thumb along her cheek. "You're safe here, Bee." Bee's breath hitched. Is it truly my home if I choose it?" He nodded once, slow, certain. "If you'll have it." Her tears fell freely now, not of sorrow, but of release. Then maybe, just maybe, this storm gave me the place I was meant to find. The future lay uncertain beyond the snow, but inside that cabin, wrapped in warmth and something that looked very much like love, a single question lingered, heavy with hope. Would choosing each other be enough to stand against whatever waited outside those mountains? Stories like this remind us that sometimes the harshest storms lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Two strangers, abandoned and wounded in different ways, found warmth not just in a cabin, but in each other's courage, kindness, and quiet strength. And every time you listen to one of these frontier tales, it proves something simple but powerful. That connection travels farther than any trail through the Rockies. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? And do you believe that love found in the worst conditions can become the strongest kind? If you do, stay close. The next story is already on its way.